our Rotarian speaker, who today is acting as a guest speaker. Lieutenant Portia, kindly introduce our guest speaker for today.
Thank you, RP, and good evening to my fellow Rotarians. I am pleased to introduce the guest for tonight's meeting, who is in the person of Dr. William Ahadzie, former CEO, National Identification Authority and past president of Rotary Club of Accra-East. Dr. Ahadzie is currently director of the Ghana Institute of Social Development and the immediate past chairman of the National Population Council of Ghana. He was also the former chief executive officer of the National Identification Authority of Ghana. He has extensive consultancy experience in various aspects of national development planning for both local and international development institutions. He has consulted extensively as a governance and human resource development expert and as a social policy analyst over the last 3 decades for several international organizations, governments in Africa, and many local civil society organizations. The list of organizations he has consulted for include the World Bank, UNDP, USAID, UNICEF, GTZ, ILO, DFID, National Development Planning Commission Ghana, the Parliament of Ghana, and Zambia, among others. He is a past president of the Rotary Club of Accra-East. Fellow Rotarians, visiting Rotarians, and guests, help me introduce PP William for today's meeting. PP William, we are on all ears. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I stand on the existing protocol of BAG, Mami, Florence, Christiana Hagen, to say I am humbled. I would want to share my screen, and therefore you give me, I don't know whether RP, you'd like to share the screen for me, or I can do it from here.
I think you can do it from your end too.
Okay, all right. There we go. Okay, I hope that everybody can see it.
Yes, please, we can see.
Okay, all right, so let me just quickly start. I have 25 minutes maximum, so I probably will do this presentation in 20 minutes, and then we can use the 5 minutes for questions. Rotary time, as I know, you don't joke with. Now, this is a little bit of history on the ID system that Ghana has had over the years. It started in 1972 with under the NRC decree 129, and it started with a citizen's ID card. Indeed, it was issued. It was a very simple ID card, which was issued in some regions in Ghana, Volta region, Northern region, Upper, and Brong-Ahafo Western regions. It was mainly for the border regions and for good reason. I'll explain that later on. There was also an attempt by the PNDC, NDC to begin an ID system, and there was a technical committee that was set up, and it put up a report that was looked at, but the card didn't start. But the main driver of the current ID system was the meeting that was held, the National Economic Dialogue that was held in 2001, which brought together a lot of different groups, and they proposed that we needed to have a national identification system. And therefore, a secretariat was established in 2003, headed by Professor Dumont, if you recall. That process continued until 2006, when actually an act was passed to establish that. But why was there, or why is there still a concern for a national identification system? Three different groups benefit. I mean, the individuals constitute one group because it grants them secure identification, and particularly because it's biometric, they get more secure identification. There are constitutional provisions that virtually promote rights of individuals. So an ID system actually promotes the rights, which include freedom of movement. And indeed, for an individual, an ID system is also useful in terms of access to social services. Now, that particular initiative indicated that we should push for a biometric identification for the simple reason that biometric identification is the most secure and uses unique features of an individual, and they are normally unique to an individual. Those ones cannot be duplicated. Your fingerprint, for instance, is not duplicable. Your facial recognition, and indeed, when they take your portrait, there are statistics that are taken for your ear to your eyes to your mouth to your nose, and so the portrait doesn't change. Indeed, your face doesn't change when those ratios are looked at. The iris scan is also another form of biometric registration. And then some use blood. Indeed, the Israelis use blood, and I mean, are noted for using blood, so that's unique to you as an individual. And then others use palm architecture. Then governments obviously benefit from an ID system, more efficient and targeted provision of services. If pensions, access to funds, if you are providing money transfers, for instance, and the LEAP program, it makes it more efficient if you know who you are dealing with. Otherwise, as we know, there's a lot of identity theft around. It promotes good governance. Obviously, when you are assuring the rights of individuals, you are actually responding to one of the tenets of good governance. National security is a given. These days, with a lot of terrorist groups moving in and out, an ID system is essentially very, very important. I've talked about the rights already. In the private and public, in some private and public institutions, there is a need to know who they are dealing with. I mean, in the banks, for instance, they talk about know your customer, and that is so important because of problems that we have with very huge defaults in repayment of loans. It reduces identity fraud and theft, as well as promote efficiency in service delivery. SNEED, the Controller and Accountant General, and all those institutions benefit from that. Now, the NI was established, as I said, with an act of Parliament, and it is mandated to collect personal data on citizens, both resident and abroad, and foreign nationals living in the country. So it covers everyone within the jurisdiction. And then it also mandated the NI to create and maintain a national database, or what we call a civil register. And it should also provide and promote the use of national identity cards to advance the economic, political, and social development of the country. And then, as I said, it should actually issue cards to citizens as well as foreign nationals living in Ghana. It established in executing its mandate, it's established a national data center, obviously, which you know of, is at around the Tekwashi Circle, and it's used to manage the identity system. Indeed, it began the process of collecting biometric data across the country in a mass registration exercise, which I'll speak to in a moment. And then there are two dimensions of doing that: mass registration and continuous registration. The mass registration involves moving into the field and collecting biometric information, which was done around the country, been done a number of times. And then the continuous registration requires that it sets up an office everywhere in the country, indeed as many places as possible, so that those who were not registered under the mass registration exercise could walk into an office and then get their biometrics taken and issued with their identity card. It's supposed to develop structures to maintain the integrity of the system, operate and manage the system itself, educate the public on the need and uses and benefits of the national identification system, and essentially build trust in the system and mobilize support and advocacy for it. And I'll explain that. Holding personal data, people's biometric data, is very, very, very important because of things that have happened around the world where identities have been stolen and used for fraud and indeed in some cases for terrorism. Now, there are laws that regulate the work of NIA, and those who are interested, if you Google, you get the details of them. I've mentioned them here because of the limited time. I'll just go. The national identification system, and what the authority is mandated to do is to develop a system, and these are the aspects of the system. It's an integrated, multi-purpose, computerized system that consists of a national register, which is a database, and that holds your personal information. A process of registration is part of the identification system. A process for generating and assigning a unique personal identity number is important. Your PIN number is important. And for those of you who have gone around the world, you know, in the UK, for instance, you have your NI number. In the US, we talk about the Social Security number or the SOSH number. They are all part of the system. And then it is supposed to install a mechanism to verify and authenticate identity as anybody wants to establish who the person they are dealing with, what the person's true identity is. And this means that there must be a centralized multi-biometric system where other institutions can link up and establish your identification. And I'll speak on that one as well. Does it benefit us? Yes, it does. And I mentioned that already. It's able to securely and undoubtedly verify and identify all Ghanaians, citizens living here and anywhere, and foreigners as well. It protects and provides essential services to them. I mentioned this already. It offers a common platform, and this is quite important for integrating and enhancing public and private sector business activities. In the current technology ecosystem, a common platform which is integrated, or which in the language we call, which is interoperable with other systems, other databases, is very, very essential to avoid duplication and waste of public money. The need to build confidence in the business environment. These days, we are talking about business-to-business transactions, e-transactions, and these ones become more efficient and better organized if there is a very efficient identification system, not only the card, but the system that allows for identity authorization or authentication. Now, these are the institutions that are supposed to benefit from the ID system, and the architecture is here. There's a national database in the middle there, and then all these institutions are supposed to create terminals, and which can then be linked to the national database, and then they can authenticate your identity. For instance, you are in a bank, and they want to be sure that you are the person standing in front of the lady at the counter is truly who he says he is. There are two things that can be done. They can ask you for a personal ID number, and then they can run a quick check into the national database, the link to the national database, and then as you are standing in front of the teller, a picture of yours should happen. It should pop up, and then your features would be established. And if the person looks at your face like they do in airports and immigration, at least your picture should show. Now, if your PIN number, if you give the PIN number and that's done, that's fine. They can also give you a verification device where you put your fingerprint on it, and then it can still make a query into the database, and then your identity will be established and the transaction can be permitted. Of course, if it isn't you, as they typically do, they will ask you to stand there and wait that there's a little problem, and then they call the back office and you can be arrested for impersonation. So these are the institutions that by law have been mandated. They are called the user agencies. These are the institutions that are supposed to establish or at least procure terminals that can grant them access into the national database. They don't need to establish our own biometric database. And for the very reason that I mentioned earlier, that it is best to have only one national data center, which is protected through several forms of what we call the access control systems, and also encoding, or if you like, encrypting the data in such a way that it cannot be stolen. Now, if you have a multiple or what we call siloed identity databases, there are serious risks that we face. So basically, that's what I'm saying. The architecture involves the database, what we call the AFIS, which is automated fingerprint identification system. It's a program that allows for identity check and identity authentication. Now, all of these ones, of course, the countries are also supposed to build a backup disaster recovery center far away from the main central database. In the unlikely event that there's a disaster in the main database, the live information can still be transmitted. So virtually, you need a duplicate database, which is in a remote area. Now, you can do online verification where they have a handheld device, for instance, on the spot verification, where there's a handheld biometric verification device, and then your fingerprints can tell. Sometimes they are linked to the systems. You can do live, you can do offline verification. Sometimes it will be loaded into the verification device, and then when you go there, you're going to transact your business. They can check whether your information is correct or not. This one is a decentralized arrangement where the systems are programmed for specific areas you can be directed to. All right, so this is quite technical. I'm looking at the time, and so there's features. What these basically tell you is you have to guarantee the security of the system. You have to ensure that people cannot hack. Typically, the people who hack are the ones who write the program. So you need different levels of security to prevent people from entering the system and stealing others' identity. Data integrity has to do with the kinds of data that will be collected and ensure that they are linked and matched throughout the system. Sometimes people give wrong information. Biographic data is wrong, where they live, where they don't even know. And then it becomes problematic if you want to trace them, especially when the entire system is running. And therefore, you need to ensure that there is integrity of the data that you collect. So, for instance, when you register, they will give you a slip, or initially they will give you a printout that would ask you to establish whether the information on that particular piece of paper is correct or not. Now, this is just to ensure that what will be inputted into or uploaded into the database is correct and will not have problems. Now, that doesn't mean that once you do that, there can't be errors. Typically, we find human errors where your name will be spelled wrongly. I mean, I've had a lot of problems in that regard. A lot of people write their Ahadzie without an E. And I always remind people that mine has an E, and therefore it happens to many people. The databases also must be properly done. And the information sharing system, you need a local area network and a wide area network, and you need to run on services provided either by the institution or by internet service providers for this identity checks every time. I've mentioned the type of registration that's carried out already. One is, well, they move into the field with registration machines and then register as has been done. And then you go to a fixed center location. This one, for instance, by law, it should correspond to polling stations for electoral purposes, and that will come up later on. Now, the authority has introduced other forms, other options for registration. They do house to house, they go to institutions to register, and then in fact provide premium services as well. There's online portal registration. Of course, this one, you can provide all your biographic data, and then you go to a center, and then they can do the capture of your biometrics. That has to be live. You must be present for that to be done. Now, you also need your digital address. It wasn't there in the past, and so that is important because then they can link your location with your PIN number and with the transactions that you are doing. The portraits, they've introduced new ones about portraits and iris scan. And of course, there are what we call breeder documents. They are documents that you use for the acquisition of the Ghana card. There are several of them that have been listed earlier in the laws that were passed, but now you have to use a Ghana passport or a vouching system or a guarantor system where somebody who is registered, somebody who knows you will vouch that you are truly the person you say you are, so that you can acquire your Ghana card. This is the process of issuing the card and generating your PIN number. And I will speak about the PIN number briefly. It's the most important identifier that you can carry, even if you lose your card. If you can keep your PIN number anywhere, it will be very useful. And in some countries, they hardly issue an ID card. They just issue what we call the unique PIN number. And in India, for instance, they have, when they began the ID system, they just gave people some slip of paper with their PIN number on it, and they created a system where you can use that for transactions. So your PIN number is personal to you, and you take it from the point is given to you till you die, and it's not transferred to anyone. It's a very, very essential one. Then the card is printed. I mean, I don't want to go into if it's for the technical people, but this is the Ghana card. It is still being issued, and it has to be issued because it contains the information that you require. If you look at this, was the old form. It had a 2D barcode at the back, but this is a new one that has a chip embedded in it. Excuse me. The reason why it's not chip embedded is that this is a 64K chip, and it's a storage device, and a lot of information can be loaded onto it. There are divisions in it, your health information, or for technical language, the applet. There are places where you can store your health information. It can act as an electronic wallet, just like you do with your bank card. When the systems are established, it can be interoperable with your bank, for instance. So you can load money on it and then go to an ATM and you can cash your money. In fact, that's the ultimate aim. So it's a very useful approach now for introducing this chip embedded card. If you turn the back of your cards, for those of you who have it, you would also see that there's a sign there which we call the RFID, the radio frequency ID. You can use that to cross toll booths. You can use that to go to car park, your car parks and all of those things. They are all on this card. Now, what's the particular status now? And I'll be wrapping up very soon. The population of Ghana is 30.8. And then so far, according to the statistics on the NIA page, 16.6 million people have been registered. 16.3 million people have cards printed for them. and then 13.3 million people have got their ID cards. You can see that the law says that all Ghanaians must be registered, whether living in Ghana or abroad, and indeed of all ages. And of course, it means that the system must register you when you are born, and then issue with a card which will travel with you. But your biometrics will be taken maybe at 5 years when the features form, and then by 15 you'll be issued with the ID card. That's what the law says. Now it means that there's a large number of people who still haven't got their Ghana card, or in fact don't even have any form of identification under this program. And that's what's generating the pressure and the difficulties that we are facing now. I've already talked about the benefits, so I'll be wrapping up on some of the challenges, and then I can reserve part of the time for us to talk. There's a problem with the Ghana's borders, and people just come in and go because of the nature of our borders across the country. As I said, people can come in and walk in. Some of the borders are just parts, and people walk in and acquire the card. That's against the law, but they do. Now, we have cases of people pretending they are Ghanaians to just acquire the Ghana card. I mean, we have cases where people from neighboring countries have come around and collected the Ghana cards and holding themselves out as Ghanaians. That is an infringement of the law. There's an issue about nationality, the nationality status. Who is a Ghanaian? I'll leave that question for you to answer, and there are lawyers who can answer that. Is it residence? Is it birth? It's still an issue. If you recall, the Supreme Court says your birth certificate does not establish you as a Ghanaian, so you know the reasons why. We also have problems of Ghanaians aiding and abetting people for false and fraudulent registrations. Now, the reason why that is worrying is that there's a lot of money laundering that occurs across borders and indeed globally. And when people launder money into the country or out of the country, they can come back with different identity if you don't have the biometric data. So the point that this tries to stress is that if you help somebody to falsely acquire a Ghanaian citizenship, you are virtually abetting crime commission and indeed putting the sovereignty of the country at risk. One of the biggest problems, as we know now, is that there is lack of cooperation or collaboration between the agencies that need to use identification for their transactions. We have the NCA, the NIA, we have the Control and Accountant General's Department collecting their biometrics to the point that you have too many biometric databases, what we call the silos of biometric databases. And it's risky because you don't even know how those collecting the data are storing them. Now, there are standards of data management and storage. And indeed, again, the NIA has secured the International Standards Organization certification. And that means that once you enter into bilateral agreements, you can create the links for them to authenticate people's identification even outside the country or wherever they go. And so when other agencies are collecting biometric data without the real checks and the levels of access control, it's a very risky thing. Somebody can steal your identity information and can wipe your account clean, depending on where they get access to. The authority still hasn't established a wide area network for data sharing. Of course, it's just because the constraint in terms of resources. Now, the construction of the remote location disaster recovery center has not also been done. Some of the information has been ported into the national data center that has been built. Now, the system has to undergo continuous upgrading because of the speed at which technology is changing. And if you haven't finished the first stage of ensuring that everybody is enrolled onto the database, you have a lot of difficulty moving to the next stage. As you know, in the technology environment, particularly for even phones, the operating systems are basically the same, but they upgrade them continuously. So you get more functionality and you can perform more functions. Now, my final note, given that the time is almost up, is that we have to ease the pressure on the NIA to complete the issue of the cards so that the other institutions that are required can then use them. If you put them under that much pressure, they commit a lot of errors, and in fact, there are many guru boys that come around and issue false ID cards, and it defeats the system. Rotarian President, fellow Rotarians, this is briefly summarizing something that can be spoken of in 3 hours in 25 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, fellow Rotarians and guests.
Thank you very much, Dr. William Ahadzie. This is indeed insightful. And your last comment that if we put a lot of pressure on the NIA, it might cause them to make a lot more errors, which will eventually defeat the purpose for the reason they want to achieve. Fellow Rotarians, I believe there are some questions. If you have a question, kindly show by hand. So give you the floor. Okay, so Rotarian Kito of Rotary Club of Winneba, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Alfie. My question goes with the last slide that he spoke about, the challenges. I always have problem with so many institutions collecting people's data, and we don't use it. Like NHIS, they take your bio data, but when you're going to the hospital, nobody will scan your or take your thumbprint or something to show that this is you or not. So with this new Ghana card system, can we now stop? Can the other institutions stop what they are doing so that it all becomes centralized with the Ghana card? Can the other institutions stop, like SNET, Health Insurance and stuff?
Okay.
Can I respond, or I should wait for more questions?
Maybe you take 2 more questions, then you
All
answer
right.
them. And since our time is fast, my fellow Rotarians, it's 6 minutes to the time where we pledged of closing. We'll crave your indulgence because we had a double-barreled meeting today. We'll add some 10 more minutes to our agenda. So if there are any other questions, kindly show by hand so Dr. William or PP William can provide answers to them.
Yes, yeah, PP William.
Any more questions, please, fellow Rotarians? Okay, thank you very much. I love it from Victor Yele Were, who is here. Okay, there's a hand up. CP Sika, you have the floor, please.
Good evening, RP Andrews. Rotarian Kito has sort of touched on the first question I wanted to ask, which is about the National Data Bank. If it exists, why do we have all these other people, all these other institutions collecting our data? But then my main question is on the issue of the question PP Ahadzie asked, who is a Ghanaian? I thought our constitution stipulates who a Ghanaian is, unless I'm wrong.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Dr. P.P. William, there's a question in the chat box, and I want to read it. What is the difference between ECOWAS identity card, which was given out in 2019, and the Ghana identity card in terms of validity? And this from AG Nana Mensa. We have one more hand up. I guess that will be the last question, and you provide responses to them. From Return Debbie Frog. Return Debbie Frog, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you. As someone who is not a Ghanaian and comes to Ghana to do a lot of work, I found it very difficult when I went to try to get a SIM card because you need an ID card. And so I wasn't allowed to get a SIM card. So how is the government interacting with that for people who are coming in to do work here or people who are staying here for any period of time, but are not Ghana nationals?
All right, thank you very much,
Okay. All right.
VP William, you have the floor to answer these 4 questions.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So the issue about the multiple data collection systems is a worry, but you know, typically, these ID systems operate in the vendors market. So everybody comes with new technology, and then all institutions go to different vendors to procure the systems. The unfortunate part of it is that they don't communicate. They can't communicate because there are what we call proprietary rights over the inventions or the programs that many of these vendors, hold. They invented a system and they wrote the programs and they encode them. They encrypt them. So they don't want anybody else to connect with that. Indeed, for the national ID system, the protection, the access control systems are so strong that you also don't want strange systems to connect. You want to have terminals that can be linked to the system and that can allow you to control data movement across. But many of these institutions have gone to procure their own systems, and the systems cannot communicate. The only way this can be done, and I think that this is what CP Shkatu was saying, the only way this can be done is for government to just put its foot down and act in accordance with the law, that no institution should and they are there in the law that they can access the data. It's just this technology ecosystem. It's very easy to make a link. For instance, if you go to the ATM and you put in your card, it's so connected to the bank, and then we introduce the GIP system where the banks, you can go to any ATM and then cash money, particularly if you have certain types of cards. That should be what should happen with the ID card system. As for the issue about who is a Ghanaian, it's a vexed question. And as I said, I'll leave that to the lawyers because we've tried many times to sort this thing out. Is it by birth? Is it by nationality? If you go into the law, those who were born before 1957, who were not Ghanaians, automatically gained citizenship. Beyond that, if one parent is a Ghanaian, it allows you to the law says you can be considered a Ghanaian depending on where the parent comes from. In fact, even if then we have the issue about dual citizenship. So it gets kind of confusing, and that must be cleared so that people will know exactly where they belong. Otherwise, it's creating a lot of problems for the registration. Indeed, for non-Ghanaian Rotarian Debbie. Now, what we did in my time, let me say that, was that we introduced something we call foreigners identification system, where when you come in and you're going to work, you pay $120 and you get a FIMS card. We call it a foreigners ID card. That can allow you to procure the services that you require. So that is available. And depending on how long you are going to be in the country, especially if you're coming here to work, you can just walk into the National ID office or wherever they are issuing the FIMS card, so you can get that one, and then you can use it for your transactions as you move across. If it's just for a short visit, I must admit that I don't know what the conditions are now, but typically, if you are working with an organization, sometimes you can ask somebody who's registered to get it for you, and then you can use it while you are here temporarily. We were trying to work with telcos so that people who come for short visits, 2 weeks, and they still want to link up with their families or their people back home, can be issued temporary cards. But I'll have to investigate whether that has been done. But given all the challenges that we are facing now, I guess that the best option is just to go for the FIMS card, the foreigner's ID card, and then you can do your business while you come here. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, VP William, for sharing such insightful presentation with us. Fellow Rotarians,